And as long as it's not immoral, unethical, illegal, doing harm to you or others, you're good. You're right. So just own it. Because also people are pretty, I would say, pretty intuitive, unless they're overriding it intentionally. So they know when you're not telling them the truth or you're giving them a PR scripted response.
Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. As always, I'm your host, Chris, and as always, I'm joined with Lucie. Lucie, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. Even though, to be honest, I'm a little bit sad because right now, as we're recording it, there are fires in the Los Angeles areas.
Yeah.
And so that's sad, concerning. But I'm happy that right now we have something to put my mind off from that to a different
Yeah.
topic.
Yes. Yes. And you're safe, right?
Yes, and luckily I'm safe in my area. Yes.
Okay. Good. Good. Good.
How are you doing?
Um, Today is interesting because it's a little bit of a time capsule. I know that this is going to be way beyond everybody when they listen to it, but tonight Penn State is playing the semifinal playoff game against
Oh.
Notre Dame. And so when I listen to this episode in the future, and when anybody else listens to this, we'll all know the outcome. But we don't know now. And so it's a very stressful day for me to think about that game and worry about that. Lucie, I'm excited about today's episode because oddly enough, even though we talk about difficult conversations and conflict and all this kind of stuff, this is actually not a topic that we've talked about in this podcast, even though everybody keeps writing about it and talking about it. Um, but really about how do we create psychological safety? And there's tons of people writing about it and great people. So I'm excited that we have an expert to talk to us today about how to cultivate it and how we can embrace that as leaders and doing all that stuff. So I'm going to introduce, welcome to our podcast, Kelly Meerbott.
Thank you so much, Chris and Lucie. And Lucie, please stay safe out there, sister.
Thank
Like
you.
that's scary. And
Yes.
I'm in Pennsylvania, so go Penn State. Although
Yep.
against the Oregon Ducks, I wasn't cheering for them, Chris. So I'm sorry. Don't hold that
It's
against.
tough.
Yeah.
Tough
But I'm
loss.
cheering for them tonight. So there you
Thank
go.
you. Thank you. Kelly, because we always love having our guests introduce themselves because it's your story. We like to respect that. So tell the listeners kind of where you're from and how you got to where you're at.
Yeah. So I'll start with where I was born. I was born in Hempstead, Long Island. 6 weeks later, we moved to South Florida, and that's where I grew up. And I went to college in Massachusetts because it was one of those things, where's the furthest school? And Dartmouth didn't accept me. So Holy
Mm.
Cross was where it was.
Oh.
I worked in corporate radio for about 11 years and was laid off January 20th, 2009. To say that I was shocked is an understatement. I didn't see it coming. There were now I will. This is going to sound counterintuitive, but on the front page of the Wall Street Journal in, let's see, November of 2008, there was an article written that said when Bain Capital came and bought Clear Channel that there were going to be 30,000 layoffs. But of course, in my hubris and arrogance of being a great salesperson at that point, I
Mm.
didn't think it was going to be me. And it was. Um, Ironically, 2 years after I got laid off, I wrote my boss who laid me off a thank you note because what I thought was the worst day ended up being the best day because it launched me into this vocation of coaching. And this is what I was called to do.
Mm.
I think I always knew about coaching, but I didn't have the language for it because my dad is a former professional athlete. He's a professional golfer on the PGA Tour. So the first four and
Oh,
a half
cool.
years of my life were spent traveling from tour stop to tour stop with people like Arnold Palmer, Lee Trevino, Gary Player, Jack Nicklaus. I mean, I could keep going on. The tour is definitely not what it is now. There weren't the nurseries that I was the only kid. So if you know anything about golf or if you know anything about a child being around adults, I was raised under the cliche of kids should be seen and not heard, right? But when you listen and you observe, you learn a lot. So I learned a lot from these high performance athletes from titans of industry, and seeing my dad's coaches, swing coaches, all of that. And I just watched how these people would come in and they wouldn't, well, the great ones wouldn't try to change him. They would just kind of tweak things to make things better. And I always say to my clients, it's kind of like tuning up an engine, right? You need to change the oil, change the belt. That's what we're here to do, to make sure everything is running properly. So that's where it all started. I will tell you, I was telling this story to another journalist yesterday, that when I started, I was scared to death because I had $75 in my bank account. And 40 went to my business license in Virginia, and 35 went to gas up my Prius, which, looking back, I'm like, that is crazy. How did you do that? But there was no other choice. There was absolutely no other choice. It was either make this work or not. And fortunately, 4 months after I started, I secured my first client. So, and it's just been gangbusters since then. And, moving the business, when we moved from Virginia, because my husband was in the military 20 years and he retired. We moved from Norfolk to Philadelphia. And at first I was like, I'll go back and get a job. And then I realized, yeah, no, don't want to do that. And the universe, or whatever your belief system, kept sending me clients. So I would go on a job interview and I'd open my inbox when I came back and there would be 3 people inquiring about my services. So I took that as a hint that I should keep doing this. And now here we are 16 years later, hundreds of clients, over 10,000 hours of work. And I get to be around amazing people like you too, who are dedicated to transforming the world so that it's a better place for whoever comes after us.
That's an awesome career. I think it's amazing how you've grown and how you've developed. And so I think it's impressive, especially like that experience of getting laid off, with like that. What was that experience like to live through that culture of this impending layoffs that were kind of in the atmosphere?
The October of 2008, we got word that we were being bought by Bain Capital. Now, I had been through mergers and acquisitions with my clients. I had never experienced it working within an organization. So one of the things I would tell my interns that worked with me at radio was, make friends with the engineers, because they can make your life easy or a living hell. The engineers were great friends of mine. So I remember walking into their offices and saying, y'all have done this before. Like, what should I expect? And they looked at me without missing a beat and said, get an external hard drive and start saving your work on it. And I went, wait, what? And they were like, no. We don't know anything. But if you want to protect yourself, do that. Right. And I also consulted with a labor attorney just to find out what my rights were. I didn't have any intention. I just wanted to know, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where it's a right to work state, what do I have a right to? I was like their top salesperson at that point. I recovered like $670,000 in lost revenue from angry clients. I created I think $1.8 million in new revenue in 2008, which I don't know if you two weren't young to remember this, but nobody was spending money on anything. The housing bubble had just burst and all of that. So I remember sending out an email to my clients who were like BMW North America, McDonald's, Dollar Tree stores, Spirit Cruise, all of that. So they were marquee clients, saying, pray for my colleagues across the country. It's a very uncertain time. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay. So fast forward to January 20th, 2009, historic inauguration, right? Aretha's got the hat. Obama's being inaugurated. I had canvassed for him. I was the first time I got politically active. And I was really excited. And I walked in to the engineers and I said to them, can I stream the inauguration on my laptop? Because it was owned by the company and there were certain firewalls. And I didn't realize this body language moment until retrospect. But they were like, yeah, 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 and didn't even look me in the eyes. Well, in retrospect, no, why? So I sit down at my desk and around 9 o'clock, I get a tap on my shoulder. And unbeknownst to me, it's the guy who was replacing me. I get walked into my boss's office where the marketing director was sitting next to me, who did not like me and was laughing the whole time. So yeah, it was rough. I mean, it was really rough. And my boss looked at me and had a manila envelope with my name on it and said, you have 10 days to review this with your attorney and sign it. And I was like, what?
Why?
He goes, you have 10 days to review this with your attorney and sign it. And I was so shocked. I said, I don't understand why. And they said, and there's no such thing as this. And I know because I've checked it. We put your numbers through a corporate budget matrix. No such thing. It's made up. And you didn't make the cut, which I knew was not true because of the numbers that I was running. And because of, raising the angry client spending 300% and then being happy about. So I looked at him and I did something that I have never done and probably won't ever do again, but I swore at my boss. And I'm not going to say what I said, but it was basically, that's not true and you know it. And his response was, you have 10 days to review this with your attorney and sign it. And I was like, well, it is what it is. So I go back to my cubicle and there's HR and the guy who was replacing me. And they said, we'll pack up your cubicle and send your personal belongings to you.
Ouch.
Here's where the labor law comes in, right? And I do not have a photographic memory. I mean, Lucie, you and I talked about this before, taking notes, right? Like, I don't remember things, but somehow divine intervention was like, according to statute, blah, 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 of the EEOC, I have as much time as I want to pack up my personal belongings, and whatever is left, you will send to me. And HR went like this. So here's where the external comes back around, right? I picked it up and I picked up my wedding picture. So I walked out before I walked out, I faxed the the agreement over to my attorney, and I walked to my car and went home. My husband was in Guantanamo Bay with the 9/11 detainees, so I couldn't get a hold of him. I missed Aretha and the hat. I was bummed about it. Bummed about the inauguration, but obviously, my emotions were in a swirl and a tornado, and I basically grieved it for 7 days. Like I was literally face down on the couch, sobbing, doing the whole thing. Why me? What the hell? Like blah, 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 blah. And then on the 7th day, our golden retriever put her head in my lap and looked at me like, you smell, shower, put your big girl pants on and let's go, right? Like, now I know I'm totally humanizing her, but I got in the shower, I was washing my hair, and I was like, I got to do something more life affirming with my life. What am I going to do? And I wonder what Steve Chandler has on his website that I can buy to kind of get my head right. And sure enough, he had a success course called Mind Shift. And with it, you got a 90-minute session with a coach. And so bought it, booked the session with the coach, get on the call with her. And I had sent her like 25 pages of single space documentation of what Clear Channel had done to me. And I'm in there and we're talking and I'm just poor pity me, victim mindset, like, oh. And she says to me, are you open to some coaching around this? And I said, well, I'm on the call, right? And she said, yes. And I was like, well, sure. So she said, I think you're a victim and I think you need to take ownership of your life. And again, I'm not going to swear on your podcast, but I said some choice, colorful words and hung up on her angrily. And then again, divine intervention. There were two questions that floated into my mind. One was, is she right? And two was, is there any truth to what she's saying? And both answers came back clearly, yes. Like, you know, when your instincts and your guts telling you, your inner wisdom, it'll go, yup. And there's literally nothing you can question. So I looked at my watch and I had another 45 minutes on the 90-minute call. So I called her back and I apologized, and I ended up hiring her, and we worked together for about 3.5 years.
Wow.
And at the time she was like, you like marketing, but you're not, like, it doesn't light you up inside. And I was like, I just made this major change. I don't want to do, like, resisted the whole time. Plus, because you're coaches, the context I had for coaching was women barefoot, hippie like, with flower wreaths in their hair, tossing petals in the air, talking about the law of attraction. And I was like, not doing that. Of course, I'm completely incorrect on that assumption. And I do like the law of attraction, but I do believe that you need to take action behind it, right? So I worked with her. She kept pushing me. You should be a coach. You'd be a great coach. I was like, Charisse, I do not like. She said, but what if you could change the corporate culture based on how you showed up? And I was like, okay, tell me more about that. So we talked through it, and she nominated me for this elite coaching academy in Chicago that unfortunately did not make it through the pandemic. That's how it happened.
That's awesome. I wish we were having a podcast episode on that, because I feel like we could really dive into that. That's
Oh yeah. Well, I'll come back if you'll have me. So
would love to. Yeah. You know, psychological safety is a big word. People talk about it. There's tons of books about it. How do you define it? How do you think about it for everyone listening?
Yeah. So where it started in my mind, and, you know, my clients are my curriculum and they're a source of content. Obviously, I don't break confidentiality for anything. I will not. In fact, I've had a lot of companies offer me a lot of money to break confidentiality, and I won't do it. Just will not, because I think that's a key component. But I had a client, or I have a client right now who's female boss, not that it matters, said, is psychological safety really a thing? Wait, what? So that's when I started really diving into it and understanding it. So my understanding, Chris and Lucie, is that it is, first of all, you know, it's part of effective leadership and team dynamics. Number one, it is a branch of trust. I define it as the belief that, you know, the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking, and really about creating environments where people can speak up, share their ideas, take risks, without fear of judgment or retaliation or even humiliation. It's not a nice to have concept. It's foundational to innovation, to trust, and to high performance. Like, psychological safety should be baked into your culture, you know. And let me drop the should. It must be. Especially with how we're evolving. I mean, Lucie, you and I were talking about VUCA before, which, if you would define what that is, and I'll kind of loop back in on how it applies to psychological safety.
Oh, great question. So volatile times, which are, based on the definition, not very safe.
Right. And psychological safety is the antidote to that, right? It's the calm, right, in the storm. I don't know if you two got this question a lot during the pandemic, but I would have CEOs calling me going, what do I say? And I was like, tell them the truth. Like, oh, well, I can't do that. Yes, you can. Because if you don't, they're going to know, and it's going to erode your credibility. Instead, if you go, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, you're going to bond in that ambiguity, right? And we are living in a world where it is full blown, you know, it is full blown. Yeah, I mean, you know, Lucie, you're in California. The world is literally on fire right now.
In January.
Yeah, in January. And psychological safety really is the antidote to that. And it goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence and emotional well-being. And it is not a request of Gen Z and millennials and alpha. It is a demand. It is a requirement. So if you are not working on that organizationally, you're missing the boat, and you're going to have a problem recruitment, retention, and training, which hits the bottom line.
Yeah, we preach a lot about being open and honest and transparent. And how do you coach leaders to think about that, especially if that's not their instinct to be transparent? They want to hide information, or even not hide, they just want the best, so they don't want to worry their employees.
Yeah. So first of all, it's always about context and nuance, right? And intention, right? We were talking about
Yeah.
accountability and shaming before we started recording, and that's about context and nuance, right? So what I talk about with my leaders is HTT, honest, transparent, and truthful at all times, up into the point of liability or breaking HIPAA. You can't do that, right? So, and then I follow on by saying mistakes can be forgiven, cover-ups can't. So, here's what I would say in that situation. Like, I was role playing with a leader today who's laying somebody off. And I was like, okay, if they say this, how do we do that? Right. And that's a psychologically safe environment. He goes, well, I can't say that. I go, is it the truth? Yep. Okay, then you can say that. You can say that. And really, if they're afraid of it, or they want to hide something, then that's something for our work, right? And I mean that collectively as coaches, psychiatrists, therapists, who I am a huge fan of all of those modalities. But where I would go is dig under the underlying issue. Like, what's the root of that, right? Why are you so afraid? What do you think's going to happen? What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? And then if we see a behavioral pattern that we need to interrupt and shift, then we'll do that. But why are you afraid of hiding things? The only time you should be afraid of hiding things is if you did something. Again, mistakes can be forgiven, cover-ups can't. There was a client who I fired, honestly, because they were problematic in many ways. They had all of the isms, and I think all of that, right? Sexism, racism, et cetera, et cetera. And I had said to them over and over again, I'm hearing from all 40 of your employees that they are disgruntled, and you need to take care of X, Y, Z. And I am not a directive coach, right? I usually just share information. If it resonates, great. If not, fine. But in these situations where I had 40 people coming to me, only being there 6 months, that's a problem, and I'm going to raise the red flag, because my job is not to be your friend. It's to, provoke your mindset in a kind yet loving way. And when I say love in this context, I mean mutual admiration and respect, right? What ended up happening was I let them go, because, I'm not going to waste my time or your money. Not going to do that. They knew that. And 3 months later, there was an open letter posted on Medium detailing everything that was going on. Right. And they kept trying to cover it up and cover it up, and cover it up and spin it and all of that stuff. Own it. We all mess up, and as long as it's not immoral, unethical, illegal, doing harm to you or others, you're good. You're good, right? So just own it. Because also, people are I would say, pretty intuitive, unless they're overriding it intentionally. So they know when you're not telling them the truth. Or you're giving them a PR scripted response. No offense to PR, I love PR, but when somebody is like, oh, well, it's policy and blah, 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 blah. Come on, man. Like, we know that that's just an excuse that you're hiding behind. And again, in this age of video phones, like, you can't get away with anything, which is good and bad. Like, it's great for things like unfortunately, George Floyd's murder really
Mm.
showing us and shining a light on the, racial inequity and a lack of psychological safety from historically underrepresented communities. But also, like, there are times when you're with your friends and maybe things are taken out of context or edited creatively that
Right.
could be damaging. So I'm a big fan of having, a video phone, but at the same time, it's like, if you think you're going to get away with anything nowadays, you're out of your mind. You just are. I mean, like,
Mm.
you have to
Yeah.
be careful and intentional and thoughtful and compassionate and loving. And again, these are not nice to have. They are crucial components of iconic leadership.
Mm. Nowadays there's also a trend to close the departments, DEI. There's also a pushback that I'm noticing where the leaders say we need to focus on the numbers. People, emotions still don't belong to work. You should just suck it up and just focus on getting things done and don't complain. There are
Hmm.
still leaders like that. What would be a way, if there is a way, for, let's say, an employee that is they found themselves with such leader that is not very empathetic. They might not be very high on the emotional intelligence. They are, maybe it's not intentional, that they are just not wired that way.
Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm.
What would you advise somebody like that in that situation, an employee?
There's a couple of thoughts that are running through my mind, Lucy, and that's such a good question. First of all, I would say meet the leader where they're at. And what I mean by that is
Mm.
speak to them in their language. So if somebody's data driven, bring them data, right? If they are stoic, unfortunately, you're going to have to mirror that stoic behavior, right? One of my favorite books about inclusion is called The Inclusion Dividend. And there is
Mm.
data in that shows DEI puts 30% profit directly to the bottom line. So if they are quoting you numbers, be prepared to do that, right? To make sure that you have your data locked and loaded. Then the other thing I would say is cultivate your relationships within the organization. So mentors, peers, allies, advocates. And when I say it in those contexts, allies are those that will lockstep with you and make sure that you're not alone. Advocates are those people in the room when you're not in the room advocating for you. Mentors are ones that have been there, have been in your position, and literally know the roadmap and the landscape of the organization. And then
Mhm.
peers, peers are those people that you work closely with, maybe not in the same department. Because here's the thing, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if that person is treating you like that, most likely they are treating other people like that. And for every one person that's complaining, there are 100 that are not. So find strength in numbers, right? And then the other thing is where you work is a choice. It is. Regardless of whether or not you need the job, it is a choice. You do not have to stay in a place that makes you feel bad about yourself because everybody has their unique gifts and talents and everybody matters and everybody has something to contribute. So if those things are not noticed, seen, heard, or appreciated, start making a plan to quietly exit
Yeah.
into a position that will respect, take your time too. You
Mm-hmm.
may get so like I've had those leaders that you're describing, whether it's sexism, some misogyny, patriarchy, whatever, mansplaining, whatever you want to call it. And arguing with them or yelling is only going to make you look bad. Plus, it's
Mhm.
get you into a state, which, Chris, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but when you're in that fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, all of your resources go to the defense mechanism, right? So when you're getting upset, you're not thinking clearly, your immune system goes down, physically, you're kind of in stasis. So just stay as calm as you can and then quietly start putting together, an exit strategy because it's always easier to get a job when you have a job.
Makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, so those are
Mm.
the four things that I would say. But I'd be interested to hear how are you two, navigating that with your clients? I'm curious.
The leaders that are already aware there is a problem, first it comes as a surprise. Those leaders that are very wired on just getting things done. The first time they get a feedback and people feel offended, people feel they're being rude, that they're not creating a safe environment. And so just helping them understand what's causing it, helping them understand that different people process differently, different people are motivated by different things. And then if they are open and see the benefit of, yes, it might be helpful. Some may still struggle because they are so wired, and even the industry, some industries like, let's say, venture capital, finance industry, that can be very driven on the data, on the money. So even just being in that environment is very high pressure. Some leaders are starting, looking at through practicing empathy for their loved ones first before they bring that skill also in the work environment. So I have a client working in a very high pressure industry where he's really practicing being present with his wife when he is at home, when he has that moment with her. At least really building that mental muscle in a way of being present with somebody, of listening rather than telling people what to do.
Yeah. That's such a good strategy, Lucy. Like when I was working with the military, I had a certain number of sessions, and I would say, okay, I want you to go home and practice this. Or I would say, would you be okay with me talking to your spouse? I'm not going to share what you're telling me, but I want to get a picture because they've been with you through the good, bad, and the ugly, and it's going to also help, get results. And that was so great because some of them would practice with their kids. And their kids would call them out, and I was like, well, they're there. So one guy was really upset because his 3 and 4-year-old would not salute him or call him sir when he walked in. So let's work on that mindset, shall we? But Chris, I'm interested how you navigate that with your clients, both in coaching and your therapy practice.
Yeah, I would say I do it very similar to you. I would say I start more with like the purpose. Like, is this really where you want to be, and what do you want to be doing, and what is this what you should be doing? And then from there, I do a lot of the same things. What are you doing to manage yourself? What are you doing to find I like the way you said it, your advocates, your allies, your mentors. I think I use different words, but I like the way you phrase it. I think it's a much more catchy way of doing it. But finding those people and trying to figure out what is that person's communication style. That's absolutely right. It's trying to figure out what do they need in this kind of situation so you can meet their needs. And I've for a while I've thought it's a little bit of a catch-22 for managers, because you have to flex to your boss, to the higher ups, and then you have to flex to your employees. And so it's a weird like in between for managers, the middle managers. You always have to like flex to everybody else instead of your own style.
Yeah, it's exhausting. It's an exhausting output. The other question I love to ask when my leaders are in that state of, oh, get rid of DEI, which by the way is a major mistake in my opinion. And everybody has one, but I think your success, especially in this global marketplace, why wouldn't you want to have somebody who represents the community that you're trying to serve and support? That would be like the UN sending in a Filipino ambassador to France. Like that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Why it, make it make sense. It's like asking a cat to bark. It's never going to happen. But the question I like to ask is, do you prefer to argue for your limitations or fight for your potential, and why?
It's a nice reframe.
I'm not here to argue for your limitations. That is not what I'm here to do. I'm here to help you reach your highest potential and amplify what's magnificent about you and scrap the rest. And I don't tell you what your highest potential looks like. You tell me, because that would be me kept telling Chris who he should be, and that's not what coaches do. So
I love
Yeah.
that question. That's not totally switching gears. I'm wondering, this is a question I was asked a few weeks ago, and I think it's a good question. Like, let's say you are a leader, you're going in there and you want to change things. You want to figure out, well, how do I move things forward? How do you typically assess the organizational culture and what level of safety people are feeling?
Yeah, so that's a great question. That is a good question. Okay. So when I have new leadership going in, and typically it's at the C level or senior level, I tell them
Mhm.
not to do anything for 90 days. What I want them to do is listen, ask questions, and observe, right? And ask the questions I feed them. And obviously, I'm not like just these because I'm not
Right.
that prescriptive, but it's what's working, what's not working, what's next. If it's working, leave it alone. Just leave it alone until you tackle what's not working, right? Because if you go in, like imagine you two are leaders and I'm the new CEO and I'm coming in, I'm like, Lucie, I know how to do this better because I just came from the same tech, blah, blah, blah. Shut you down, right? And I've also eliminated Lucie's ability to take ownership of her work and bond with me. Now it's become contentious, right? When it doesn't need to be. Plus, you'll be able to get the dynamics of who the players are, what the bureaucracy is, what's the level of safety, what's the level of emotional intelligence and emotional well-being, what is the status of work-life balance, like, which I don't like to call it work-life balance. I prefer to call it work-life flow because I feel like life and flows. And the word, I don't know about you two, but I feel like the word balance just kind of is so heavy and pressury.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's how I would recommend it. And then they assess, right? If they want me to come in and assess it, I will, but I usually like to wait until they've had their 90 days. Because then I can say, okay, I've assessed it. Tell me what you've seen, and then I'll fill in gaps and blind spots. Because we
Love
don't
that.
see life as it is, we see it as we are. So what Mr. 75-year-old CEO, white guy from Indiana, Kelly Meerbott from, 48-year-old woman from New York who's lived in 6 major cities is going to see it differently. And then you've got the different parts of the country, that are, I mean, we just talked about that. There is a North and South divide. How business is done in the South is very different than how it's done in the North, and even in California. My husband did a chef's walkabout in Southern California to study fish tacos. And the thing that he called me, he's like, they told me they'd call me in a week, and that was 3 weeks ago. And all of my friends in California were like, yep, yep, yep. And to dovetail off of that, my friends in Oregon are like, you're too East Coast, you need to slow it down. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
I was like, y'all are too slow. And then then I relax into the West Coast and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So that's how I would handle it. And a lot of our work, as you all know, there are patterns, right? There are things that illuminate themselves over time. But at the same time, each organization is like a microcosm, and we don't often know what we're walking into, right? Because the other thing I'm sure both of you have experienced is sometimes our clients are unreliable narrators. I mean, I've had this idea for a long time using virtual reality for coaching, and it's to eliminate the unreliable narrator so we can see in real time what's going on in certain situations. I just haven't figured out how to monetize that yet.
We can keep dreaming because
yeah, because
it's going in the direction.
Right. They're using it in therapy right now. And what I saw in the data is that they're taking anxiety and depression from like a 10 to a 1 in 8 weeks.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And
It's pretty good.
right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, and think about that. Our clients sit in front of us and are like, oh, I went and I was such a nice person and blah, 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 blah. And everybody got mad at me. And then you dig into it and you're like, yes, that was a great intention. Your communication was terrible. the timing was wrong, and that's why everybody's angry. It's not
Yeah.
because you're a bad person, it's because you handled that situation not at the best level that you could.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So
Yeah,
before
but
we have that,
right.
and we have AI and virtual
Yeah.
reality helping us, what
Yeah.
would you say would be, let's say, 3 to 5 things for people to remember? What are some actions? What are things they can do or say that would create the psychological safety for those around them?
First of all, set yourself up for success, set the stage. So techniques like asking permission, making sure the timing, the tone, the context, the nuance is clear and it's right, which if you do that, it can create a more collaborative environment and respectful environment. Manage your emotional reactions. So my two pillars of leadership in my mind are emotional regulation and energy management, right? Make sure you are emotionally regulated. So, Chris, you and your wife have a tiff, you drive to work, you're, frustrated, you're in, your adrenaline and cortisol swirl, you get to work, somebody says something innocuous and you blow up again. That's not emotional regulation, right?
Yeah.
So give yourself some time to process those hormones. Typically it takes about 30 minutes through physical activity, but it can stay in your system up to 30 hours if you don't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Establish boundaries with clarity and compassion. Like, here's what I will do, here's what I won't do. Like, I had a potential client say to me, give me a proposal. And I was like, I don't do that. I don't do that. I'll do a contract for you, but I don't do proposals because I've done that in the past and people have stolen my work, and I'm just not going to do that. You want to make sure that you articulate your needs in a way that protects your emotional well-being and leaves room for like mutual understanding, right? You want to leave space for that. And then the final thing I would say for fostering psychological safety is, create environments where difficult conversations are less intimidating and more productive, right? Empowering both parties to, express themselves authentically. Now, I always say to my clients, a conversation is not difficult unless you label it that. Once you label it difficult, you've all, like, even as I say that, like, I mean, I had butterflies when I came on. There was a little anxiety because difficult conversations are like, oh my God, a difficult instead of, okay, Chris, I have something uncomfortable for me to say that may be uncomfortable for you to hear. Is now the right time? Now I've set you up. I've asked your permission. If you get upset, it's on you. Now, do I think you should go in like a Jerry Springer show after you say that? No. We're not Real Housewives of New Jersey flipping tables here. It would be like, I loved your episode on feedback where you give the specific feedback, give the situation, and then give them the actions and hold them accountable to that. That's the way you want to do it, which is such a great method. And I learned that from you too. So I'm going to definitely implement that. But
Nice.
yeah, I mean, be clear, go back to HTT, honest, transparent, and truthful. Like, Chris, when we're in that meeting and you interrupted me, that made me feel like I wasn't appreciated, I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, and I felt insignificant. I will tell you, everybody I've used that technique with, nobody said no, now is not the right time. So, and again, you've set the stage. You've set the stage for success. You've managed your emotional reactions. You've established boundaries, and you've fostered psychological safety with that. Because every time you have a conversation like that, it builds that muscle. Like, Lucie, you were talking about muscle memory, right? That's what it is. And I think when we're talking about no, people have a hard time with it because they don't say it.
They don't have the no muscle.
Right. In fact, Steve Chandler, when I first was working with him, he said, you need to get 8 no's every day. Every day, get somebody to say no. And that
Great
was so hard because people don't want to say no.
They haven't talked to my kids yet, but that'll be a little bit easier.
Good. Teach them no.
I don't have to teach them. I think they got it under control.
They know. Well, then you learn from them.
I know, clearly. I love those tips, Kelly, and I feel really bad that we don't have more time. I wish we could spend another like hour or two on this.
Yeah, we could
dive on it.
Yeah, we can. I'm happy to come back anytime. You all are amazing. You're doing incredible work, and thank you doesn't seem big enough to both of you for allowing me to walk with you for a little bit.
Well, thanks should be all to you because you're spending time with us.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to get in contact with you or follow you or just talk to you, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on all the social media platforms. So you can just do Kelly Meerbott, which is KellyMeerbott. And then kellymeerbott.com. I answer all my inquiries. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so highly recommend you to be connect with me on LinkedIn. Definitely connect with me on Instagram. Yeah, there isn't somebody answering my emails, it's me. And I'd love to hear from anybody. If I can be of service or support or find somebody to help you, I will absolutely do that.
Kelly, thank you so much. It's been great having you on here and hearing from your knowledge.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And we hope you'll come back because we'd love to have a part two and
Absolutely.
really dive deeper
Mhm.
into this.
Yeah, absolutely. You just tell me when.
Awesome.
Perfect.